Imagine getting stabbed 32 times. I can't really imagine it, but this guy lived through it. And that is why this episode is like, what, an hour long? I mean, just imagine it. Imagine the pain of being stabbed 32 times. And we go through the story in chronological order from the beginning all the way until the end. But before we do that, we do talk a little bit about comedy and what comedy means to him and how it relates a little bit to the events that led to the stabbing and how it relates to his processing of the stabbing itself. Very funny guy, very lighthearted. I think he's a pretty good person. I'm sure you'd agree too, just based off of the way that he talks about things. And, he does admit that the way he handled the situation that led up to the stabbing a little bit weirdly, but he says hindsight is 2020. Okay, he said himself. So make sure to follow on any social media at Jexplex, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube especially. Please, I'm trying to get these episodes out on YouTube, but it's a lot to keep up with. And please rate the show. 17 ratings, top 10% more shared globally. Very happy about these stats as of right now. And rate the show and leave a comment under Spotify if you guys can.
Yo, Jackplex, answer the fucking phone, dude.
Hello.
Jack.
Number one, actually, you're a comedian. I like funny people. I think that funny people are actually pretty honest people in a certain way. I'm sure you know what I mean. And two, I believe you had survived a stabbing and you had gotten stabbed, it was 10 times or so, and you survived. And that was really interesting.
It's 32. By my count, I had 32 knife wounds. By full disclosure, I'd say 6 or 7 of them were fairly piss weak. They're not much worse than a cat scratch or a paper cut or something. But they still count because you can't go around slashing at people with a knife. But the other sort of 25, 26 or so were fairly serious, and I did nearly bleed to death. it was definitely a thing. It wasn't like a mere 10. This is a lot.
I would definitely count those 10 too, for sure. So I guess the first question that I want to start off with, why do you like stand-up comedy?
I'm not certain that I do like it. That's the weird thing. I'm a very kind of contradictory person, and I'm drawn to it because I have a talent for it, and I've actually spent years trying to figure out how to like it. I've been trying to figure out what's my place in it, what's the point to it, because I'm just someone who kind of obsessively writes, and when I hear things that get me the idea, I've always had a notepad in my pocket for 30 years, and I'm always just I'll write jokes just based on an idea or a word or something that someone said that I've heard all the time, but I've never really done much with it. And I actually moved to Melbourne in Australia back in 2013, intending, this is more like the cultural hub of Australia, of which we don't have as many opportunities as you'd have in the US. But I intended to try and get into writing narrative comedy, sketch comedy or theatre and stuff like that down here. And I just really found that there wasn't this. I didn't feel that there was a scene for it. I couldn't meet people who wanted to give me a shot, or wanted to work on something. So no one could really find out what I did. But there's all this sort of stand-up comedy going on. Not for free. No one gets paid. You just go along and you can try stand-up comedy at things. And it was something that you don't have to rely on anyone else. It's just you, and you don't have to get somebody to work with you. And I think that's the thing that's attractive about it. It's like after years of trying to get theatre done and get people to collaborate, it's like herding sheep. Whereas this is something where you actually don't have to rely on anybody except yourself. And I think that's what's attractive about it. It's one of the few forms of performance that's available to me where I don't need anybody else. I also sing, but I can't play an instrument, which is a bummer, because otherwise I could, accompany myself on some kind of instrument. So I guess it's just in that doing comedy. And also I'm just like one of these people who likes to talk. Probably the easiest way to get people to listen to what you're saying is for it to actually be entertaining. A lot of people who just sort of want to make a speech. Maybe I should go into politics if I wanted to make a speech. So I don't know. I've been obsessed with comedy my whole life. It's me trying to find a place to use that.
And I definitely relate to you with what you were saying about having some sort of medium or some sort of level of performance that you can do it individually. And it's kind of like your own craft. It's your own thing. I see that a lot when I'm practicing MMA, how much I can learn and make my own style and my own movements, my own decision making, and how I can improve all these different things on my own. I think that when it comes to this show, I think that I definitely like interviewing people for sure, without a doubt. I like learning from people too. And I think that combining the intrinsic need that I have within myself to learn stuff while also learning stuff from other people and them learning from me makes me really happy too, I'd say. So I think that both mediums have a level of to be gained and to be lost. And I also definitely see what you're saying too with herding sheep. So you said that you liked humor. Did you get your humor from somebody in your family, or is it just an intrinsic thing?
When I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, I have 2 older sisters, and my older sisters and my father would tell jokes, and they would be like, they were probably just like the sort of things that little kids know, maybe like, why did the chicken cross the road, sort of stuff. But of course I was that small and I didn't know enough words and stuff like puns and cross, the cross referencing that goes on in most jokes. Just to me, it just sounded like they were speaking nonsense, but I wanted to be a part of what was going on. I would then tell a joke. I would just say a bunch of, nonsense, and they'd go, "What's that?" Like, the joke format was like question and answer, and I'd say something like, "Oh, why did the squiggly go to France? Hoobada boobada." And they'd go, "What?" But like, to me, that's just what they were saying. They were just saying complete garbage, and I was like, all right, this is the say complete garbage game. Why not? One day I said, "What's red and yellow and blue and white?" "The moon." And I just thought this was just nonsense. And my dad said, "Oh, well, yeah, actually, sometimes the moon is red and sometimes it's blue, and it's white, and depending on sometimes you get these different colors of moon." And to me, it was like a revelation. I was like, wait, are you saying that the stuff you guys have been saying means something? Like, this whole time, like, this garbage that you're coming out with actually means something? So that wasn't really, the moon joke wasn't really much of a joke. To me, it was just nonsense. But this idea that there was meaning to it, I was like, oh, okay. I think that whole thing of, trying to join in on something that I didn't understand as a child has sort of kept me interested in comedy ever since. It's very mathematical.
Comedy can best be defined as the art of creating and releasing tension, you'd say, right?
Yeah. There's people who would describe it as that.
How would you define it?
I think I'm just more like some kind of like idiot savant for it or something. Maybe it's just because I've been always thinking about it since I was a child. I think that there are, well, I said mathematics before, but there's like equations that you can apply to data that can result in jokes. This is a really terrible way of explaining it. Sometimes I wrote jokes and then I go, oh, this is a joke that's too similar to something that someone's already said. But there's 8 billion people on this planet, and they're all applying the same kind of thinking and mechanics to ideas, and they're going to result in the same sorts of jokes. So it's not actually that big a coincidence when you tell a joke that someone's told before. Okay, so this is like, actually, this is a fairly basic one. I said, I'm getting older. You undergo changes as you age. For example, I have a lot of health problems. I've always had them. I just now like to tell people all the time because I'm old. That's like a pretty basic, basic joke. But it's like you set up an explanation of I've gained health problems, but it's like, it's like, no, I want to talk about my health problems. And so I guess it's like you're applying these.
You're laying like a foundation, right? Or you're laying like.
It's actually a big part of what I do is. I write script analysis and comedy analysis for people. I don't think that I'm actually someone who's very funny in normal life, but I write a lot of jokes and I prepare that, and then when I get up on stage, it's a very manicured and rehearsed experience. Whereas off the cuff, sometimes I'm funny, but sometimes you're not. I think it's actually really important to not always be trying to be funny. Just as a person, when I was younger, I used to be. I think it was one of those kids who could only talk in Simpsons quotes. Over sort of stages of my life, I'd come up with sayings for myself, and one of them was save the performance for the stage. Because if you're always trying to put on a performance in real life, show me the real you.
Yeah, it leads into a persona, and this persona is not actually you. Because it's impossible to be funny all the time. Like, we're all human, you know what I mean? Like, it's not.
It's also weird. Like sometimes I'm like I do get a wind up me, and I'm just like off the cuff, and people find me very funny is a better way to put it. And then at a later time, someone who's like, oh, this guy's been funny at all, they'll say, be funny. And I'm like, what? Come on, you were funny at some previous night. Be funny right now. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Yeah, it's really annoying. I could definitely.
Yeah, it's like organically. It's something that just sort of organically comes out when you're in a conversation or in a room or something. But I think it's important that you're not always trying to be. If you're trying to be super entertaining every minute of your life, I think that way lies madness. It's not healthy.
When you had moved to Australia, please remind me the country that you were in before.
I've always been in Australia, but I moved within Australia from like the equivalent of Florida to maybe the equivalent of like New York or something, but not really. It's not a good equivalent. Yeah. Australia is not like America. I have actually lived in America. I lived there 2.5 years back in the 80s, and that was a very interesting time. So I have a bit of an affinity with America. And also a lot of, despair about it, of what's going on there, because it's a place where I would like to live, but I don't think I could ever actually live there.
Me either. And I'm here.
Well, I'm angry enough about your politics from 10,000 miles away.
So you said that you had lived in the U.S. For 2 years in the 80s. What year did the stabbing take place?
Oh, this was 2020.
Oh, this was very recent. Very, very
recent.
Yeah,
January 2020. Yeah.
So can you kind of paint to me, kind of where you were in your life during this year when this incident had occurred?
Well, it was 2020, so it was before I think maybe there were rumblings of the pandemic, of like, oh, there's something going on in China or something maybe at that point. But I'm not really sure if it was much in the news. It actually came at the culmination of an entire series of just awful events. I have like an immune condition which gives me really bad arthritis, and the treatment for that is to take drugs that suppress my immune system, which is not something that you want either. And by 2017, I'm in a state where I could sort of barely walk anymore, so I had to go on these awful drugs. And the awful drugs have awful side effects, as well as the fact that when they're working as intended, it's pretty bad. You don't want to taking something that suppresses your immune system. I was going through all this kind of nonsense from that, having a lot of difficulty going out in public because of, I guess, anxiety issues and whatever else was going on, as well as my physical issues. And then I went out one night to a comedy night. There was a woman at this night who had, from the comedy scene, who had added me on Facebook a couple of weeks earlier, which was random. And I said, oh, hey, you added me on Facebook. We haven't met. Hello. And then we did our comedy sets. And at the end of the night when I was leaving, I thought, oh, should I offer her a lift? And I thought, oh, she's just going to think I'm creeping on her. So I left. But I thought, oh, I'm sure I'll person another time and meet other people. It'd be good. And she was murdered an hour or so after I sort of decided not to offer her a lift. Now, everybody knew her, said no way that she would have accepted a lift from you. And rationally, I totally understood that. I just had a total mental breakdown over this. I mean, it was just the worst thing. The worst thing that had happened after a long line of terrible things that had happened. And so I was kind of having the biggest sort of crisis of my life.
I would like to add, just to relate what you're saying to a previous call that I had before. I had a caller call in, and he was talking to me about his childhood best friend, and his name was Charlie. And one day he didn't go. Charlie and his brother actually went riding around on ATVs around the neighborhood. They invited him, but he couldn't go. And Charlie tried to use his brake on the ATV, but it didn't work, and he actually passed away. He hit a tree.
Oh, yeah.
And he died.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really affected the caller that I was talking to was, he always wondered for a very long time if I had done
Things
this.
would have been different. Yeah.
Yes, if I had done this, if I had done that, and it results in an injury. It's a mental injury. It really is. It's very serious.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was being like ripped apart every time I was awake. And the amazing thing about it, like, this was a person I didn't know. I didn't know her at all. I'd literally just like met a person. And then, but it was like a single decision that I had made. And it was difficult. Obviously, like, you can rationally tell yourself, like, it was nothing to do with you or anybody else. It was just the person who committed the act was just the person who committed the act. But I still had just like overwhelming like guilt and distress about it. And it was weird because I also just like couldn't really talk with anyone about it for a long time. I was going through this total crisis over this person who I had literally met this one time. It was difficult for me to, I guess, like talk with people about it because I couldn't compare what I was going through to the people who actually knew her, what they would have been going through. Because, it was appalling. The poor woman was like 22 years old.
Yeah, and another thing too that happened to me actually pretty recently was that my coworker last year had actually passed away on Halloween randomly, drunk driving accident. You always do think of these things, and I'd like to let you know it's definitely valid to feel that way. I mean, I'm sure that you might have managed to come to some sort of peace with it, but even I myself, sometimes I'll think about that. And I'm sure even, again, that caller I had referenced earlier still thinks about Charlie, and they're like, damn, like, what if, But it is very valid to feel that way.
I'm certainly not like in distress every day about it. And I'd say that I'm mostly past it because, it was now 4.5 years ago or something like that. In the 18 months leading up to me being attacked, of course, it was a big deal. And in fact, I actually became obsessed, basically, that I was cursed and that someone else was going to be, murdered, and I had to prevent someone else from being murdered. So I was in like a weird and heightened state of mind, and then under a lot of stress. But also just like I think the stress that you would expect of someone. I mean, I'm too old to be living in shared housing. Money's always a struggle, and my living situation was not particularly great, and my health was not particularly great. The drugs that I have to take so that I can walk make me sick, and this was something that I also did not know for quite some time, but the particular drugs that I was taking at that time for the arthritis also had the effect of heightening my emotions or anxiety. I think it made me more vulnerable to all emotions, but of course the main emotion I was feeling was anxiety and distress and whatever else. And in fact, things have gotten better since the actual medications I were on. We changed them. But anyway, that was all going on with me. And then this other guy sort of moved into my house 18 months after this sort of terrible thing happened.
You were living with roommates, I'm assuming, at the time, or?
Yeah, basically, yeah. Living in a house with this young guy owned this house, and he lived there, and there was a third bedroom, and he basically got someone else into the bedroom at some point, and which I was fine. I mean, I encouraged him to do it. I actually wanted there to be someone else around. It's just for the sake of it. And you say we got this guy, we thought he was normal, and then the young guy who owned the house went away on a trip, overseas trip, after about 2 weeks or so. And then as soon as the guy who owned the house went away, this guy who just moved in just changed. Like, he stopped going to work. He was just in his room getting stoned every day. And something I like to tell people is that, I think marijuana should be legal or at least decriminalised. It's not in Australia at this point. And then I'm fine with people doing it, but I absolutely cannot live with people who smoke dope. I'm too old for it. I've been through awful stuff with awful housemates so many times. And it's just kind of like such a share housing thing where you sort of check with people like, hey, you guys cool with this before you move in. You don't move in and go like, oh, okay, well, this is what I do now. I think there's so many households where everyone would be fine with just like light drug use and stuff. I would say I was already under a lot of stress, and then all of a sudden this guy was in the house all the time, never went out. I'd walk in and there's like the smell of marijuana. I was like, oh no, why can I never get away from this? So I had stress about that, but I didn't like have a go at him or tell him off or something. I took him to lunch and said, like, dude, you can't. What's going on with you? And like this whole thing, like, this is not when you're share housing. You don't just like spring this on people. Like, you check with them before you move. Because I knew that the guy who owned the house wouldn't have been cool with it either. And he said, well, this is just your problem. I live here now and I could do whatever I want. That kind of gave me the measure of it. I wanted to say, well, yeah, you can do whatever you want if you want to live with people who hate you. But I didn't. It's kind of like, okay, the path of reason has failed. But it's your problem, you should just ignore me. So I sort of did that as best as I could. But this is the weird thing, like when the owner of the house came back, he stopped smoking, started going to work again. But I actually, because of some other things that had happened, I actually didn't make the connection. I didn't realize that he was only doing it because, basically the landlord was away. It became clearer later that he thought that the landlord mattered, but that I didn't matter. He was somehow under that impression. Impressing the landlord mattered, but I didn't matter at all. He was wrong, because when the landlord came back, I said I basically had a breakdown. When the guy who owned the house came back, who I was actually decent friends with as well. And I said, "Oh, this guy just changed since he went away," and I'm just like, I've just not known how to cope for the last 4 weeks. And he said, "Oh, let's see what he does." And he had actually stopped smoking and was going to work and again as normal. And I actually honestly thought that he must have had just kind of like a revelation or a grow up thing or something. I don't know. His motorbike had been stolen, and I just thought maybe he stopped taking drugs because of that. But 6 weeks later, the landlord went away again, and it started again. Except with this time, it wasn't marijuana; it was alcohol. And it was difficult for me to piece this back together in hindsight, because it was so strange. I didn't actually have that much to do with this guy. When he was at home, he was usually just in his room with the door shut, doing what? I don't know, going mad maybe. Looking back, he would sometimes just like say weird things to me that at the time I would just be like, what? Like, he would ask me questions a lot, and then he would ask the same question again. I had a chronic cough, and he would ask me about the cough, and then I'd answer it, and then he'd ask me the same question again, and I was like, give him the same answer again. And it was just weird. I just didn't understand. I just thought, oh, maybe I just don't understand what he means. But looking back on it, I guess maybe it started to feel like he didn't accept my answer, or he was accusing me of lying or something like that. There was just this weird undercurrent that I couldn't figure out. But I mean, like I said, I thought he was just kind of an idiot. I didn't get it.
You seem like you're a pretty good-hearted person too, because the way that you approach the entire situation too, by taking him out to lunch, actually, and talking to him about it like a reasonable person, very, very good human behavior, I would say. Plus, with everything else that was going on in your life too, a very, very human reaction. Very, very human reaction.
I guess I kind of like feel that surely we can, make our sides of things known and negotiate something or whatever. But like, I mean, I don't know. I don't like to have a crack up at people or just like instantly become. I didn't want to throw a tantrum about it or something. But I was in this situation where it was really bothering me, and of course, it was at the time when it was just me and that guy. And my ally, who would have been the landlord, wasn't there. Oh, what do I do about it? And to me, that seems like a good solution. Took him out to lunch and said, look at all these places these are places around this local area. Now that you've just moved here, these are places you could go to when you leave the house. It's healthy to get out of the house. This is right. This is what I do. I come here to get out of the house, and they have nice. You can get lunch here is nice. I just sort of showed him around. But yeah, he's just a weird guy who could not take like the best meaning advice ever. That thing with his motorbike that I mentioned, when he moved in, he was parking it in the backyard, and then he just sort of started leaving it on the street. And I said to him, dude, hey, I don't know if you've ever looked around the suburbs, but no one ever leaves their motorbike parked on the street at night, because you can just pull up next to it with a truck and hoik it onto the truck. He said, oh, no, it's a good area. And so it wasn't a good area. It wouldn't mean anything to you if I told you what area. But even in good areas, no one leaves their motorbike parked on the street. It's just
so he clearly had some type of issue with boundaries and an issue.
Yeah, sort of
issue with boundaries and an issue with, I don't even know. Let's learn more about this guy. He's asking you questions twice, and what else happens?
Yeah, I mean, he was just kind of, when he moved in, I thought that maybe he was just kind of a bit of a drip or something, which is fine. I mean, I didn't expect everyone to be, he just kind of liked what he did, and he was very into cricket. I didn't really have that much to do with him, so I only actually had this like handful of interactions over the 8 weeks that he was there. But the main thing was that like that period where he was just smoking dope and just in his room 24 hours a day, every day, he was getting Uber Eats for every meal. He'd emerge from his room in the afternoon and collect Uber Eats from the front door, and then get it again at dinner. And otherwise, he was just. I'm actually just someone who I need some alone time. I need some like home alone time, and that's one of the reasons why having this guy who had a job, it meant that I could arrange things so that I would at least get some time home alone. Part of that was because I rehearse and I write. And I practice singing, and I want to be able to do that with some privacy. Like I said, I was still going through a mental health crisis at that stage. Sometimes you just need to be at home alone and have a bit of a cry and scream and so on. He was just there all the time. I'd have to like go out and I was actually like out in public, like walking around, just getting my stress. Just going, oh God, this guy's here all the time. What's going on? But yeah, the whole thing with him, just he would sort of just sometimes you come out and just ask me weird questions, and I didn't really think much of it, until later. But it was maybe a bit of a hint as to what was going on with him, because when the landlord went away the second time, about after we'd been there for about 2 months, this guy, he said to me, like on the day the landlord went away, he said to me, "Oh, I'm gonna go out and buy some alcohol." Like, he announced it to me, and I was like, "Okay." Like, why not? Sure. What I didn't know was that he was like a bona fide alcoholic. Like, he had a massive problem with alcohol, and he clearly knew that. And the other thing that I didn't know was that the landlord must have actually talked to him about the marijuana at some point, without then telling me that had happened. It sort of seemed that like he was actually like stewing in resentment over this for quite some time, and I was completely oblivious to it. And when he said to me like, "Oh, I'm going to go out and buy alcohol," knowing that he was like a massive alcoholic and he should never drink, I now take that as him saying, "Oh, you don't like me when I'm high. Let's see how you like me when I'm drunk." And as it turned out, it was actually mostly fine. Up until the whole murder thing, it was actually much more easier when he was drunk than when he was high. Like, one night he came out of his room at like midnight and cornered me in the kitchen as I was going to bed, and just asked me. He did the whole weird questions again, but like drunk version of weird questions. So it was even more hard to understand. I was so tired. I was like, and I eventually had to say to him, "Oh, dude, I really don't understand.
I gotta ask too. Did you ever feel like threatened?
No, I didn't.
Just felt weirded out, just like a little uncomfortable.
No, not really. Look, I think maybe everyone else in the world probably would have been like going, "Oh, these are red flags," and all this sort of stuff. And I don't know if it's just whether maybe I'm less judgmental, or maybe I'm just too self-absorbed, to really be thinking about like what's going on with other people. Because for me, it was just like, okay, this thing that's happening right now is a problem for me, but as soon as the thing that's a problem for me stops, I'm just, it doesn't matter anymore. So it bothered me when I was coming home and smelling dope in the house, and he was always there. And then as soon as that stopped, it was not, well, that's not a problem anymore. And that was the only real problem that I had. I didn't have a problem with him other than that, which had happened very early on in the piece, because, we were basically getting on with our lives. I mean, I think that there was this whole other narrative to this entire like 8-week period that was going on in his head, and the weird questions he was asking me was part of whatever was happening in his head. And my theory is that he was developing a fantasy of like victimization, that I was scheming against him or something like that, or what, maybe. I don't know. No, sort of did this weird question time thing with me on this Monday night, while he was drunk. And I went to bed, and he actually went into the backyard and was like ranting to someone on the phone at 1 a.m. And I put earplugs in and just went to sleep. I was like, oh, I don't know. And then nothing untoward happened again until the Friday. And I think I was, working on writing stuff, and I finished at 7 o'clock and then watched like Netflix or something. And then all of a sudden it was like 1 a.m. I was like, oh my God, I went to the kitchen again to get a glass of water. He must have heard that, and he came out of his room again at 1 a.m, cornered me in the kitchen at the sink, and started asking me weird questions. And this time though, I just said, oh, what is this? I don't know what this is. I was cracking at this point. I don't know what is happening. And he dropped his mask because he was all like smiling, like, oh, look how friendly I am. And he said, oh, what is it? You're a rat. You ratted me out. And I assume that was him referring to me talking to the landlord about the marijuana.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure what it was all about.
Yeah, I had no idea that like he clearly felt that he had a right to do whatever he wanted, and I was meant to keep his secrets from the landlord, who was like also like a friend. And I'm like, what? But he said that, and then he said a bunch of stuff about my schemes and plans, which was just nonsense. But he had this idea that I was tending to be sick. I had a chronic cough. I think it relates to the immune suppressing drugs that I have to take. I've still got it. I've been coughing a bit throughout this. It was extremely bad at the time. I'd actually have to quit a job that I had because I couldn't stop coughing. I was mainly like working on stuff at home and then going out as much as I could, to try and basically create new work for myself. Yeah, he said something like that. I was pretending to be sick as part of like a scheme, some kind of scheme. And then he finished it with, said, get a job, you lazy rat cunt. And I got really mad. Like, that made me really mad. Like, I'd never had a crossword with this guy. I thought he was an asshole, but I'd never actually gotten angry with him. And I basically told him right off, put myself in the corner with the kitchen table between us, because I wasn't going to have him saying that I'd backed him into a corner or something. And then I really let him have it. I told him right. And I don't think maybe he was expecting that, because I think I'm generally fairly mild, but he didn't know that he was dealing with someone who sings and does comedy and who can yell very loudly when I want to. And it was also just probably like a big mistake on my part, because as justified as I may have been with being angry with this guy, like I was said to him, like, the nerve of you to be lecturing me about anything at 1 a.m. while you're drunk, and on drugs and whatever else you're doing. You've lived here for like 2 months. Are you kidding me? I've lived here for like 2.5 years. I mean, I've done a lot of share housing, and I've lived with people who are just awful, but I've never actually lived with someone who was just genuinely a problem alcoholic. I didn't really know, what that entails. Maybe I probably should have, but like a person who's drunk can't just drop something. I let him have it, and then he was following me around the house for the next hour and a half. It was almost like he was trying to keep me angry, or
like he was just following you around and arguing with you, or just like standing there?
Basically he just wanted to keep it going.
Were you reciprocating after that?
I was more or less telling him to go away.
So like, did you go back to your room, or were you like in the living room, or?
I actually, because I was already trying to go to bed, I told him off, and then I was like, okay, we're done here. I went to my room, and I was going to go to the bathroom and have my shower and go to bed. But he kind of like put himself between the bathroom and my room, and was just like saying nonsense to me, like, oh, you've left a light on, you must turn that light out right now, wasting electricity. And I'm literally going to the bathroom to have my shower. Go away. And it was just making me angrier and angry. But again, like this whole time that this stuff was going on, I wasn't so much concerned about my safety. I was actually more concerned about managing. I don't like being angry. I don't think I get angry very often. I think I was thinking about it. I probably think about 5 times in my whole life where I've been actually really cross with someone about something. I think this was like at the end of an 8-week campaign of this guy being kind of a pain in the ass during like the worst period of my entire life. He went away again, and I found that I was actually too angry to go to bed. So I went back to the kitchen and decided I had this like food in the fridge that needed to be cooked. So I thought, I'm just going to cook this food while I wind down. And he came out of his room again while I was preparing this food in the kitchen. And I was actually like cutting up food at the time. I was cutting up vegetables and stuff. And he was a good 4 meters away from me. I don't know what that is in America speak, 4 yards maybe, on the other side of the kitchen. He came in and he was like going rah, 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 at me, and I turned around because I was like cutting up food, so I was holding this kitchen knife, and I said to him, like, I'm too angry to go to bed. I'm going to prepare this food while I cool down. The best thing you could do is just stay away from me. And he was like, rah, 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 rah. And I said, no, really, fuck off. Come in. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. And he went away again. A short time later, came out of his room again. He was like talking to someone on the phone at what it was, 1:30 in the morning now, saying like, oh, he's coming at me and waving a knife in my face and stuff. And I was like, oh, you fucking liar. He's, oh, am I a liar? Which he was. He basically kept coming out and saying, oh, you're so aggressive. Why are you so aggressive? And it's like, oh, it's all a mystery to me why you're even angry at all. I started to get this notion that he was, I mean, maybe he wasn't, maybe it was just his, the trip that he was on, but that he was almost like deliberately trying to just wind me up, make me angry. Maybe he wanted me to take a poke at him so that he can say, oh, look, he's attacked me or something. I don't know, but I wasn't going to fall for it because I'm, not a drunk. much easier to control your emotions. And then, at one point, he went to the backyard and he was ranting in the backyard to whoever he was on the phone to.
Who would want to talk to this guy?
I know. I suspect it might have been like a relative or something. I'm really not sure. I mean, of course, we didn't know that he actually had like severe mental health problems. Okay. He'd later tell the cops that he'd stopped taking his antipsychotics because he was worried they'd interact with all the alcohol he was drinking.
That actually makes a bunch of sense.
That makes a bunch of sense. Yeah, it was like, hey, he was trying to do the right thing, you know. Better stop taking these antipsychotics. It could be trouble. He made an informed decision to drink alcohol, knowing fully well that he was a massive alcoholic. And I think that he did it because he created this fantasy of like that he was victimized. I don't think it was just necessarily just by me. I think the stuff that came out in court was that he'd been a victim of everything his whole life. It was interesting, some of the things that came out, they sort of said, oh, he worked at this workplace between these years and he was bullied at this workplace. In this time period, he was, drinking 4 bottles of wine every day and, smoking heaps of dope. And it just happened to be the same time period as like that he was being bullied at work. I think maybe they thought if they talked about it like a bit a ways apart that wouldn't be obvious, but of course it was. And it's like, really, was he being bullied at work, or was he being treated, in the manner that you might expect if you're turning up to work drunk and stoned out of your brain every day? I don't know. It's hard to say that and like I say, I obviously can't comment on what actual problem he had, but he clearly had problems.
So you guys are like in the kitchen at this point. Did you say that he was holding a knife, or you were holding a knife?
I was early on, because I was cutting up food, and I was only holding a knife while I was cutting up food.
Yeah. And then he goes outside, and then
he was in and out of the kitchen a whole bunch of times. Like as soon as I finished cutting up the food, the knife was in the washing up, so it didn't really come back into it. Like I think it stayed in his mind. He latched onto it. It was like, oh, he had a knife, so I'm justified in whatever I do. And then eventually, like this went on for quite some time. And he was in the backyard, ranting and screaming. I was so angry. I mean, I was just really, really couldn't. My whole plan to just like do this while I calmed down, it was not working because this guy just would not stop. I actually eventually went outside and turned the hose on him. There's a thing of like, I don't know, I must have seen or read somewhere of just like it's a tradition to like, turn the hose on the drunk in the yard. But I went outside and I was just that fed up, and I turned the hose on and sprayed him with the hose, and I was actually standing right near him, so we both got really wet. For me, it was actually a relief being just like doused with cold water, and I was, and he went, oh, is this funny? He put me in a headlock. He said, oh, do you think this is funny? Do you?
Did you guys start like a physical struggle at the point where you spray him and then he puts you in a headlock?
He put me in a headlock. I didn't do anything. I didn't.
Was he squeezing hard?
No, he just maybe I've got a different approach to like, I've been through some like stuff with violence and violent boys in the past, but to me, I'm just like, I'm not someone who like have a fist fight with someone or get, I don't know. I guess I'm a different kind of person. To me, it was funny. And he only had me in the headlock for like a second, because like I dropped I dropped the hose straight away, and he let me go. I think he was a bit confused about like, oh, and I turned the hose off. But then he was like following me through the house, and we're both wet. Why did you wet me? I said, because you're a prick. He said, why did you wet me? I said, because you're a prick. He said, why did you wet me? I said, because you're a prick. And that answer is never going to change. And you keep asking me the same question over and over. Always going to be the same. It's because you're a prick. I said, dude, you take this energy, stop, take this energy and start looking for somewhere else to live, because you cannot come back from this. And he went away again. And I had a shower. I finally got to have my shower. This was like 2:30 in the morning or whatever it was now. I was exhausted. I had my shower, and then I went out, and he was having his shower, and I actually mopped the that where we'd walked water through the house because it was muddy, and then finally went to bed, and I thought, oh look, I'm gonna have to. I was thinking back over a bunch of stuff that he'd said, and I thought, this guy's gonna try and I think he's going to try and stitch me up with the landlord, or maybe even the cops. I don't know, because he'd spent the whole night saying that I was the aggressor, or that I'd started it, or whatever, in various forms. But because he was kind of weird and incoherent, it sort of took me a while to start thinking this stuff. So I actually started writing an account about what had gone on that night in my diary. So I'm lying on my bed writing my diary with my cat. I've got this little cat, and he came to the door of my room, and he said, are you awake? I said, yeah. I was actually I'd cooled off now. I was fine. I said, yes, I'm awake. You come in if you want. And he said, no, I don't want to come in. Just don't come in my room. And I was like, I'm not going to come in your room, dude. Just go to bed. And he went away. And then I started to think I think at that point my subconscious started to go oh, maybe I should actually be more worried than I am. Like I said, I'd spent the whole night just the whole time just more worried about controlling my own emotions, because I don't like being cross. And I thought, oh, what if I fall asleep and he comes into my room and just does something weird, while I'm asleep. And again, I wasn't really imagining anything bad. I don't know, just like, because I wet him. And I got out of the bed. I got off the bed too, and I moved my fan behind the door. And I leave my door open half a foot for like my cat to go in. I moved my fan behind the door, so if he opened the door, it would knock the fan over and I'd wake up, is what I was thinking. And I went back to my diary and I was writing the diary. And he was like stomping. I had him stomping around the house. He went stomping into the kitchen. And I just thought, oh God, this is going to go on all night, isn't it? And in my mind, he was like stomping petulantly like a baby and went into the kitchen and like got snacks or something like that. I heard him like open, his cupboard in the kitchen where his stuff is. Totally imagine him, getting snacks and stomping back to his room and just being like, I'm being noisy at 2:30 in the morning. And of course, he got his kitchen knife from the kitchen thing, and then he came, stomping out of his room again. I was like, oh God, so that's when I thought this is going to go on all night. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to shut the door. I don't need to leave the door open now. I'm just going to shut it tonight. She can just stay in here with me. And I got off the bed to shut the door, and he actually, as I was going to the door, and it's only a little room, he started opening the door, and I was like, oh, what's going on? And he came around the door with this, knife raised, psycho style. And I was like, oh, he's come to murder me. Like, what? I did not see that coming at all.
When you saw like the knife in his hand, I mean, I know you just said you kind of like laughed to yourself like right now, but like even in that moment where you just like, oh shit.
Well, it was like, it was a surprise and such a gigantic escalation. I mean, in hindsight, I must be a bit dim because I probably should have seen that coming, but no, it was such a surprise, and I was just like, I wasn't. People that say, "Oh, yeah, were you quaking in terror and all those sorts of things?" So, no, not really. It was kind of like, "Oh, this is incredibly serious. This is not
a joke."
And no, not a joke. They're like, "Oh, this shit, shit just got real." But also like. And here's the thing, look, it's difficult for me to do this in a coherent way. I did a festival show where I talk about all of this stuff, and I talk about other murders, and of course the murder I mentioned earlier, people who murder. One of the conclusions that I had already come to about these young guys, like 19, 20, early 20s, whatever, who in Australia we sometimes get a young person who will like murder someone, and it's awful, like what happened to this person that I knew. We don't have the guns that America has, so when it happens in America, that person kills dozens of people. So we're very lucky to not have that here, but we do have, I think, the same sorts of people walking around. They just don't have the capacity,
the means to the end.
They don't have the means to do as much harm. What I felt after having this experience, this direct experience, and looking into other experiences, what my idea of it was that these people who commit these acts they're more or less an act of self-destruction. They're more or less an act of suicide. Like you might, in our day, or say when I was angry with this guy, right, on this particular night, we're angry with people and we're going, oh, I really want to do something. But the thing that would stop you from doing something, even if it's just, swearing at someone, let alone attacking someone, the thing that stops you is going to be, if everything else failed, it's going to be considering the consequences to yourself. I'm not going to go around, crashing into cars with bad drivers that have angered me because, I'll go to jail, get in trouble or whatever. Every other reason for not doing the wrong thing fails you, like being a good person, or you're just so angry that you can't see anything like that. You're like, no, fuck this guy. The consequences to yourself, it's going to stop you most of the time, I would think. And so people who commit these like terrible acts, if we can describe them as sane at all, I would say that they're so often at a point when you look at their lives, they're like going, I don't care about the consequences to myself. I don't want to protect myself. I'm just going to act upon this impulse that I have. I think maybe with my guy, the fact that he was so drunk also made a difference. And of course, drugs and alcohol are often a factor in these crimes. But like when he came in with this knife, and I had already had these thoughts about, boys who murder. And I just started saying to him, dude, you're murdering me. This is going to ruin your life. What are you doing? You got to think this through. Tomorrow you're going to be like, I wish I didn't murder that guy. and like I don't think I was saying it as like calmly as I am now. I mean,
no, but that's real. Like,
but that
it's
is
true.
What I was saying. It's exactly what I was saying. I've actually got my exact words written out somewhere because, of course, all of this is really burnt into my brain, and I wrote a very detailed account, thinking that I might need to use it in court. As soon as I was able to write again. But yeah, no, I was like, yeah, I think some people, one person that I talked to, and I talked about this, and they said something like, bargaining. And that annoyed me, because it was as if they were saying that I was like, it was a tactic that I was using. And I was like, no, I mean, I was genuinely concerned for this guy. I mean, of course, I'm like, a bit worried about, being murdered was a worry, but it was just like, no, dude, you've got to consider what you're doing. So I said to him, you are killing yourself. And I really don't know if anything that I said got through. I mean, I can't know that for certain. All I know is like, the actual events that happened, because I sort of grabbed his wrist of the knife thing, and I was trying to grab his wrist, and I got a few shallow wounds in my chest at first, and then of course he slipped out, and I got my arms and hands got all cut up because I was shielding a lot.
Can I ask, I'm sure in that moment you had a lot of adrenaline. When you were getting stabbed, did you immediately feel pain? Did you?
No, it was more, I think that in the moment, and so, I mean, I'm certainly not a doctor or a psychologist, but it was more just, oh, this is very serious. There's kind of like a state of being that maybe few people you would hope have ever experienced, where there is just absolutely no time for thought or examination or feelings. It's just actually like pure
experience.
I guess pure experience, yeah. And you just sort of find, maybe in that moment you like find out who you were or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm making it a bit more fantastical, but it's doesn't hurt at first. Certainly did later, but at the time it was just the signals that your body is telling you is like, oh shit, no, this is quite serious actually. but it's like but pain, actually being in pain from it is actually not really useful to you in that moment. So maybe you don't experience pain because it's not useful, but you sure as hell know that something very, very bad is happening. I think the fact that also, like, I saw it coming. I mean, if someone attacked you from behind, who knows, it might be different. Eventually, like I said, my I got a lot of wounds in my arms, and then I think I like matrix dodged like a blow to my head at one point, because I had a little cut on my head. But then he got me right in the neck, and I lost control of my right arm when that happened. And at that point, like, there was no, self-defense was over at that point when he got me in the neck. I was never actually trying to hurt him, or, I could have like shoved him into the wall. I was actually worried about, because we were right in front of my bookcase, which had like my collection of like Transformers on it. And I was actually really worried about knocking my Transformers over. It was a kind of an odd, I do remember thinking that, which is an odd priority. But I also thought, like, I don't see myself as a fighter, and like really I needed to talk him out of what he was doing. But he got me in the neck, and at that point I felt myself deflating, and I did sort of start to think, this is, I guess I could just let this happen. But I went like, well, no. Actually, no, I'm not actually really interested in dying in this particular way. So I kept talking. I kept saying things to him. Saying things like he had a trip planned for like the following week. He was meant to go on a trip. So you're going to go on that trip next week and that sort of stuff.
So he attacks you, and then you kind of lose control of your right arm, and you get stabbed in the neck. And is he saying anything to you while he's doing this?
He never said a word. No. Oh, in fact, he said something before he came into the room, which I forgot to mention. He said, "I'm sorry that you're making me do this."
Typical language used, blaming the other person for what they're going to do, as if it's the other person's fault.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, when he said that, because I was already kind of like moving to the door to shut the door. I think my subconscious was like going, dude, you got to wake up. You got to wake up to what's happening, and I was just like not waking up. But I was like, I'm going to shut the door. I'm a really strong feeling I want to shut the bedroom door. I can't know for certain. Maybe he wanted to come into my room and like wave the knife at me and make me cower in fear, and maybe that's what he really wanted. I don't know, maybe that's what he was imagining. I have this idea that maybe throughout the whole night he had wanted to feel powerful, and at every turn he had come to the wrong person for that, But I don't know. It's hard. You can't know what's in another person's head. That's the only problem. You can only go by what they say. And that's what he said before he came into the room with the knife. "I'm sorry, David, you're making me do this."
God damn, that's so crazy, man. And as you're like, oh my God, like
it's a lot of a lot. Yeah.
Kind of at this point where he gets you in the neck and you lose control of your right arm, does he keep attacking you, or does he?
Yes, but he dropped down, and attacked both my knees. I was still standing there, like I was standing the entire time this is going on. So I've sort of I've got wounds in my chest, heaps in my arms, like a whole bunch in my arms and hands. And he got me in the neck, and I think he was getting kind of getting fed up, that I hadn't fallen over and died or something. I'm not sure, but he dropped down and hacked at both my knees with this knife. And I was like, "What the fuck?"
Did you kick at him or like?
No. At no time did I ever actually try and do anything to hurt this guy. I was just like saying to him, like, "Dude, you got to." I was like trying to stop him. I was trying to like grab his knife hand and knife, the wrist, whatever. Grab his wrist and just like stop him. But there was not a lot of thought put into what I was doing. But this was just what I found I was doing. Trying to convince him to think about the consequences for himself and physically like slow him down and just like stop him from doing what he was doing. And in his mind, he probably like read me trying to grab his wrist as like, oh, he's attacking me. I don't know. He later would tell the cops a story that was like, he came into my room and I leapt off the bed and ran at him, and it was all self-defense. And the cops were like, really? You got a kitchen knife and went to a guy's bedroom and self-defense? You could have left the house, you could have called the cops, you could have barricaded yourself in your own bedroom. I don't know. So yeah, I think he eventually abandoned that story. But I think also his own memories of what happened that night are probably not very clear even to him.
He called the cops.
No, he did not. No. When later when he was talking to the cops, like when he was being.
How did they arrive? So he's attacking your knees. He attacked your hand.
Look, I have leapt ahead a bit. Yes, he stabbed me and cut up both my knees fairly badly, which I could have done without. And at that point, I did start to topple over, and I'm a bit confused about it because it was all quite frenetic, but. I think I started to like fall forwards, and then he was like crouched down attacking my knees, and then I think he actually like leapt up and went over the top of me and stabbed me all down like my neck and back and even the back of one of my legs. I think we tumbled around a bit. I'm confused and unclear about exactly what happened there, but I wound up on my hands and knees next to my bed, bleeding profusely, and I had my head down, and I was just kind of like waiting for the final blow. I mean, I was completely helpless at this stage, and I was just waiting for him to like shove this knife into my brain or something. And he stopped. He said, "Oh, I've stopped." And I looked up, and he was like, right there, and the knife was actually sticking out of my shoulder. And he said, and he was like covered head to toe in my blood. And he said, "It's okay, my bad." I don't think he literally said my bad, but he sort of said something else. It was like, he had like this got out of hand kind of energy. Maybe the stuff that I said to him got through, or I don't know. So I'll never know what happened in his mind, and the only person who would know is him, and I don't think he would be a reliable narrator because he was so drunk and out of his mind, that I doubt he knows exactly what happened. But he said, I'm gonna help you now. He said, I'll just get this, and meaning the knife. And I said, no, leave it. I said to him, leave it where it is. Leave it where it, no, leave it. Because I've seen things where like, if there's a knife in someone, if you pull it out, they might bleed out, or something. But also, like, I just said, leave it. And he said, no. And he pulls this knife out of my arm, and then he's like holding it up, and he's like right inches from me, and he's got this knife, and it's like, see, isn't that better? And I was actually like involuntarily like shrinking away in terror. and I said like, yes, well done. And he said, oh, stop being silly. He was referring to me being, shrinking away in terror. He said, stop being silly. I'm gonna help you. I said, could you put the knife down? It's a bit unnerving.
How are you speaking? I mean, like...
I could barely move at this point. I never lost consciousness, and I never lost the ability to speak. And I told you earlier, I will talk at you forever if you let me. It's hard to shut me up.
You're still not feeling pain yet, right?
Oh, I'd say I was at this stage, but I would say that, like, kind of like you're in so much pain, but also like in so much adrenaline, and also what was happening was so crucial, again, that I don't think that my body or my brain was actually like, let's not worry about the pain for now, where, this is like every second counts.
Yeah, like
of what's going
your body
on.
had a lot more information to process.
Yeah. Like, well, basically, so I had 32 knife wounds, so it's like, it's kind of like maybe you're in so much pain that it's kind of irrelevant. Your body's like, let's just not worry about this. There's too much of this for us to process right now. We'll come back to it. Anyway, he put the knife up on the bed, just really conscious of where it was for the rest of the time. He said, I'm going to save you, but you have to tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. Okay, I became really thirsty. I don't know if you've ever seen like a movie where someone's been shot, or like, oh, give us a drink of water. I don't know, that always seems to be in World War I movies. That's a real thing. When you're bleeding out, you get really thirsty. There was like a glass of water and 2 bottles of water on my bookshelf. Didn't they just get me one of those bottles of water that's on that bookshelf behind you? He turned to the bookshelf. Like the water is like right in front of him pretty much, but he couldn't see it. He turned back. He said, there's nothing there. I said, dude, on that shelf, there's like 2 bottles of water. Just get me some that water. He turned back to it again. And then he said, there's nothing here. And I can't see anything. And he left the room. And I was like, okay, this is what I have to work with. Like, it's up to me. And I really wasn't in a very trusting mood with him at this point. But like very, very fortunately, because I was like right next to my bed, I was able to sort of like, flop around a bit and tug on the charger cable for my phone and pull my phone down from the bedside table. And my hands were all cut up and I was dying, and I was just getting my phone open and figuring out how to operate a phone was really difficult. Like, oh my God, how does a phone work? How do I make a phone call? And I couldn't remember what the emergency number was. In Australia, it's 000. Apparently 911 works in Australia as well, because it's such a famous number now. They had to add that because people kept ringing 911 by mistake. But 000 should not be difficult to remember, but it was. But I eventually managed to dial emergency, and I put it on speaker. I shouted, ambulance, police, and the address. And I've been stabbed many times. And he actually came back into the room, I think just as I was dialing. And he brought like a big jug of water or something. I had a sip of this water and then threw up. I immediately threw up. Then the operator on the phone was talking to us, and he wound up taking over the phone call. After I got the phone and dialed, I couldn't move again after that.
Did you end up passing out?
Talk. No, I never passed out. I never lost consciousness the whole time. I could talk, but I couldn't move.
I'm assuming the first thing that they did was they just took you straight to a hospital, yes?
Well, when it took them about 15 minutes to get there. So I had basically 15 minutes of managing this dude who was still in the room with me, and I really wanted him to go away. But like he got on the phone call, and the emergency operator said, "Oh, is the person who attacked him still there?" It was me. Sorry, whoopsie, sort of stuff. Won't happen again. I was delighted because, like, I know they record those, calls as evidence. So I was like, well, my murder's been solved already. That was easy. Like, as soon as he came into the room with the knife, I was like, this is the end of my life. Like, I did not expect to survive this. I thought I was going to die. I wasn't particularly super scared because it wasn't useful to me, but I was using my time effectively to try and prevent that outcome. But yeah, anyway, he went. The operator said, get a cloth and press it against the wound. And I was like, this is going to be good. I am literally bleeding from every part of my body at this point. And he left the room and he came back with a blanket, I think. And I think he just like
one big cloth.
Just one great big cloth. And I think he draped the blanket over me and then just like lay on me or something. I don't know. It's like he squashed me. Maybe he just used his, I really don't know, because I was kind of like, on the floor. But he squashed me. That hurt. I just screamed in agony. And he said, "Oh, stop playing the victim." It still makes me laugh. He said, "Stop playing the victim," whatever it was he said. And which was just insane. It was just like the most incredibly comedic thing that could have come out of his fucking mouth. and I said, "I am bleeding from every part of me, you silly Billy." And I'm still quite amazed that I called him a silly Billy, but I wanted to say, "You fucking moron," and I very deliberately did not. Like, the knife was still right there within him. I was being very careful about what I said to this guy this whole time. I was sick to death of him, and I was like, this guy's gonna kill me through trying to help me. And I said to him, like, hey, like, go to the front door and turn on the lights and open the door so that they can come right straight in when they get here. Like, every second's going to count. He didn't do it. He didn't leave the room. I really want this guy to go away. I've established already that he never listened to me. He'd never take my good advice. Anyway, the operator told him to do basically what I just said, and he went and did it. And then as soon as he opened the door, the house was just full of people. Yeah, they obviously got me to the hospital in time. I talked to them nonstop in the ambulance as well until I started just like screaming and shaking, and so they shot me up with ketamine. And then I was having like a ketamine trip for hours, not realizing that that's what was happening. I thought this is the afterlife. This is weird. This is what happens when we die. We have kaleidoscoping visuals, but then that wore off. And it was like 6:30 in the morning, and I was like, "Oh, I'm alive! Well, that's a surprise." Did not expect that at all, and I was quite cheerful about it. And everyone thought I was crazy. And so, well, yeah, well, I expected to die, so this is actually a really good outcome.
After this all had pretty much wrapped up, and I'm assuming, did you have any permanent damage after the attack?
Yes, but less than you would expect. So my knees were both fairly badly damaged, and my arms and my right arm was actually paralyzed for a few months. At the shoulder muscles were like I could use the fingers and stuff, but the shoulder I couldn't like raise my arm. Couldn't do a Nazi salute even if I'd wanted to, which I didn't, thankfully. Because we had the pandemic hit straight there, I actually couldn't go see physios and stuff. Like we were all in total lockdown in this city. So I had to like describe stuff over the phone. And so I was trying to describe my injuries, and like, I can't do a Nazi salute is like how I was describing what groups were paralyzed, because I don't know the words, like, I don't know what I've had years of physio and stuff. Pretty much I can walk around and people won't know that anything ever happened. They'll be surprised when they learn that. And I did, the nerves eventually started working again. And so I do have, I can raise my right arm if I want, in manners that are acceptable. But like I do have a lot of nerve damage through my arms in particular. So yes, I'm not going to be working as a removalist anytime soon.
Did he end up going to jail? Or
oh yeah.
Were you happy that he ended up getting some punishment, or were you just wanted him as far away from you as possible? Because it seems as though throughout this whole conversation, right, you seem to have had a very lighthearted approach, and I'm sure that's come from, again, as from your love of comedy alongside, I'm assuming that you've talked us through plenty of times, as you said, you had written about it, detailed account of it. So I'm sure you've thought about this plenty of times, and the more you think about something, the more you kind of, you come to terms with it in some sense. But how did you feel about him, and how did you end up healing spiritually afterwards?
I think, like, I was, you have conflicted feelings about people. For one, like, there's a degree to which I feel, sorry for him. He made really specific choices that led to that moment, And I think through me, trying to go over the detail of it, get it down, was for me. I mean, when I woke up in hospital, I was like, "What happened? what exactly?" Because it was very, very chaotic situation. So I had to put a lot of it back together. But my feelings about him, sometimes was at the time I'd be just like really a mixture of like being angry with a person, but also like sorry for them. I was also just like, I think that like sending someone to jail is like a really serious responsibility. And I mean, there's lots of things with like people like, oh, send that bastard to jail for forever, and no amount of punishment is good enough. But I was like, to me, I wouldn't want to spend a day in jail, like years and years. It's like siphoning off someone's, part of someone's actual life. So I was glad that the responsibility of deciding like how long he went to jail had nothing to do with me. I was just really, really concentrating on like the responsibility of giving the most truthful account of what happened. Like if they wanted to say like, oh, he gets a sentence discount because I'd hosed him down, outside, I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, it's like he wound up being sentenced to 6 years, but he won't be I doubt he'd be in jail for 6 years.
You seem so lighthearted about it, afterwards. And you had talked about too about how you just weren't really in like a good place in your life at the time. How long did it take for you to kind of reach this point where you are now, where you're just kind of, I'm never going to say anybody gets over this, and I'm sure you haven't gotten, I don't think you ever do. I think you just kind of move on from it, but you seem like you've reached a place that's a lot more like, I guess, comfortable.
Well, look, I actually don't really, I'll tell you that like, one of the things is like as I mentioned earlier, like I expected to die and I didn't. And so it was really only all good news. When I was in hospital, I thought, well, if the worst thing that comes out of this is I've got a dicky arm, that's still an amazing deal. And I got the arm back as well. And in fact, a bunch of stuff happened because of the assault, which was actually good. I got some, like, not heaps, but some victims' compensation from our government, which helped to get me out of bad living situations. My living situation is better because of the assault. But also, like, in terms of things that bother me, it's so much easier for me to deal with things that happen to me, I guess, than it was, say, for me to deal with this thing that happened to this other person. The woman who was murdered, who I mentioned earlier.
Did noticeably see that seemed to bother you a lot more than this.
Oh yeah, but apart from the fact that it was like an horrific thing to happen to another person, of which there's just no happy ending to that story. It's appalling. But also I also had this wrestling with personal guilt over it, because effectively it occurred to me to offer her a lift home. And I chickened out. I thought, oh, she's just going to like look at me like I'm a creep, and I'll feel embarrassed. And so I didn't offer her a lift. I thought, I mean, it was fair. Like, she didn't really know me at all. I mean, so I didn't do that. But I mean, I had at the time, I've worked through a lot of this since then, but I had huge problems with social anxiety and being out in public in those days, and meeting new people and stuff. But the conclusion that came to me from that atrocity that occurred was that, which may have been different if I had offered her a lift, was that I had to not be scared of being embarrassed. I mean, if you're going to weigh a person's life against someone being scared to be embarrassed, if I hadn't been scared to be embarrassed that time, maybe they'd still be alive. We'll never know for sure. So that 18 months of me, having a breakdown, I was fairly public about it too, I think, was me just embarrassing myself all that. I was doing stand-up comedy a lot, coming to terms with getting over being embarrassed. And I think maybe part of how I survived what happened to me was that I was not afraid. I would have been paralyzed with terror. And I was like, well, no, it was all business. This is important, and we need to deal with what's occurring right now, and we'll have time for emotions later. And yes, later I did. When I was in hospital, I had a few big cries, and I've got my PTSD. There's no doubt about that. And whenever there's a noise at night, I hit the roof. It's hard. I have difficulty sleeping and so on. But
did you ever get the chance to get therapy?
Oh yeah. I was doing a lot of like phone therapy and stuff during when we weren't able to see anyone. But I did get to go and see therapists and stuff at various points over the last couple of years. So the pandemic has it was not convenient timing for me. I'm sure it wasn't convenient for anyone, but when you literally need a couple of years of medical care, you can't actually go anywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
How would you say the place that you're in right now is mentally?
Pretty good, but I'm always going to have problems. I had problems before, I'll have problems in the future. The main thing for me is that, my life has to get better. Middle-aged and single, and there's a bunch of things I've missed out on because I've got a chronic illness. But I'm still just trying to, I guess, plugging away at trying to figure out, what to do. Like I said, I did a show about all of this a month or two ago. That didn't lead directly to me having heaps of money and owning a house or whatever it's going to take for life to get better. But certainly life's a lot better than it was in January 2020. That's for sure.
To anybody who's listening, what would you say to them in terms of how to approach life in general?
I'm just kind of like, one, don't take things for granted. Don't take people for granted. But also just try and keep an open mind about, I mean, there's a bit of a cliche, but an open mind about what people might be, suffering or going through. And don't necessarily think that everything's, about you. Like if you feel that someone's like, treating you mean or something, don't be very careful about thinking that you're right. That like, oh, I know what that person's thinking. They're planning, they don't like me, and then feed it into everything that happens is some kind of passive aggressive attack on you, because that's what this guy was doing. He just imagined that everything was about him and was just constructing this thing in his mind that just broke. Strangely enough, I go through in the aftermath of it, I go through that kind of paranoia myself of like seeing something and thinking, oh, someone's out to get me. But I recognize that it was ironic that a paranoid guy had made me paranoid. If you're ever in a situation that's going bad, or that you feel that you're going bad, just try and remove yourself somehow before it gets that bad, because you've got better options. I really would like to be able to say something that will prevent a murder. No, I'm not kidding. When I sat down to write that show, that's really, it's a big goal, but it's what I would really like to do. Yeah, it's just, I think that kind of like little decisions that we make a difference.
Huge difference.
It can make a huge difference. So if that guy came into my room and I'd come at him with aggression and I was going, "Oh, you bastard," and I'm absolutely certain that I would have been killed. I don't necessarily know that the stuff that I was saying to him, like, consider what the outcome for you, actually got through to him or not. But I wasn't actually coming at him aggressively, and I think that probably made a difference. Yeah, maybe if people had been said something nice to him earlier in the day, maybe it wouldn't have happened. I don't know. All we can really do in life is go around and just try and think the best of people and treat people as you'd like to be treated.